We had quite a council meeting a few weeks ago, as you may have expected, because it resulted in you here today. What can we do to keep people from watching football? And actually, that was a little levity, sorry folks. And as we kind of dreamed up what this conversation needs to be, several things became obvious. One was New Life Church faces a communication challenge, as in how to get the right people in the right room at the right time talking about the right things. We face a communication challenge which has financial implications. And that's a fundamentally different thing than a financial problem that has communication challenges. You're thinking, what did he just say? Let me say it 4 or 5 more times, because it's what I do for a living. If the fundamental issue is money, we got to get money. And we'll communicate to get money if it helps. Our sense as a council is that's not really what New Life is facing. On the other hand, we believe our fundamental issue is communication. How do we get in the same room together to talk about some of the things that we share that really matter? And if one of the things, as we're convinced as a council, is that God's growing us up as a church from our childhood years to our teen years, well, as a parent of teens, I know you talk about things differently when family members are teens now than you did when they were little. And we talk about money. We talk about money differently when Adam and Jake are 17 and 15 than we did when they were 7 and 5. So also, that's the stage that we've reached. So we're coming here not fundamentally because we need to talk about money. We're talking about money because fundamentally we need to be able to develop new, more mature ways of communicating about what God's doing, what God's calling us to, and what that means for New Life Church. As this idea took shape and we've formed a special team to kind of pull this together, the council said, well, we need to start with what does God's Word say? And so that's my job, and then I'll sit down, except for I get to play bass. So I'll lay that out, and then from here it's a handoff. But here's the thing. I remember a long time ago, one of the people I was working with in the ministry I was a pastor at, their child swallowed a coin. I think it was a quarter. And a really cute little 5-year-old kid who is now 5 years and 25 cents more valuable. And so my friend Donna brought her into their doctor, and the doctor says, nothing I can do for it. I'd recommend you bring him to your pastor. And I thought, this is odd. And he says, yeah, they can get money out of anybody. I failed. That little kid must still trip airport security now, years later. But the reason you're laughing so much is not because that's really so funny. You're laughing because that's that's a thing we don't recognize. That churches are always looking for money. And there are a lot of people who stay away from church because churches are always talking about money. And there's a lot of bad reasons why churches talk about money a lot. But there are also some really good reasons, as in God talks about money a lot. If you look through the Bible from the very beginning, you get different value offerings by chapter 4 of the book. And so you have Cain and Abel and the very first family fracture, the very first murder taking place because of what was fundamentally a financial issue. Who gave enough? That's the first congregational meeting right there. And if you follow it through if you read the whole Bible through, you find all sorts of stuff. You find things about tithing very early on. Abraham tithing to Melchizedek. We're not told who Melchizedek was, but we're told what percentage Abraham gave to him. Like, what's with that? And that's just still in the first book. You keep going through there. You find tithing. You find offerings which are like just for fun giving above and beyond the tithe. You have all sorts of prophets just railing away on the fact that people are wealthy and kind of warming up on that. But then when they get to the fact that there's injustice against the poor, that's when they really get stoked up. Like, you don't ever want to have someone like Habakkuk or someone like Nahum start talking, or Amos talk about how there's poor in the land. Like if you get any sense at all from his prophets, God gets really ticked off when there's poor people around. Like that shouldn't be the case. Like, hello, year of Jubilee, anybody? That's the Old Testament. You get into the New Testament, you begin to see why money was such a big deal. This is not just like anti-Semitic stereotypes. Jesus said in Matthew 6, verse 21, he talks about your treasure. Treasure's a big deal, and all the first century Jews are saying, And he said, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is also. Matthew 6:21, it's right in the Sermon on the Mount. And what Jesus is saying is, in effect, treasure isn't really that big of a deal, except it signifies something that is a really big deal. And so what we care about is what we're sold to. And so what Jesus is saying is not that you should be poor, you should get rid of your money. Jesus is saying, when he saw a widow giving her 2 pennies, like, that woman is so free. And that woman is such a picture of what I want my children to be like, God says. And he saw people who are calculating and recalculating and trying to find ways of reinterpreting different, tithing tax laws in the first century. So if I do this, then, kind of like people do with the government. If I declare it as this way, that way I don't have to give it and whatever. And so people who had plenty but were miserly as if they didn't, God says, I'm grieved. I'm grieved at that. If you read through all those things in the Bible, you begin to see a pattern that emerges. And that's what I want us to start with here this afternoon. The thing is this, all the way back in the Old Testament, when Israel first left Egypt to go into their new life, like there's a phrase, their new life in the Promised Land, God says, okay, you are now free. You're no longer slaves. You're out traveling. At that point, they had no idea it was going to be 40 years till they got there because they hadn't blown it yet. So while you're on the way, let's set some patterns for what this new life, this real life, can be like. And so God says, let's talk about treasure. Because as you start out with this freedom, you're going to find it really natural to just enjoy the fact that whatever we have is ours. And so God comes to him and says, let's do something. Don't use your freedom to indulge your sinful nature. I think Paul kind of plagiarized it with the Romans and the Galatians later on, centuries later. But that's what I hear God saying to the Israelites. Don't misuse your freedom to indulge the sinful nature, but let the freedom you have bring you closer to me and me to you. Like, let it bring us together. So God says, so let's do this. When you get something, whether it's crops from a field later on, or if it's harvest or animals from your herds, or whatever it is that you find as you're walking nomading through the desert, give a tenth of it to me just right off the bat. Like, tip out a little bit of the first of it. And they're like, well, we need that. This is our freedom now. And God says, okay, be cool. Your freedom, tip out a little bit of it to me as a way of saying, it's not God's stuff that makes us free, it's God. And if you pour a little bit of the first of it, say the first tenth, then watch if I don't pour out a whole bunch more back so you stay really free. So that's the underlying rhythm from the Old Testament all the way through the New Testament. God says, when I bless you, tip a little bit of it back. And if it makes you nervous, tip it back anyway. And then watch if I don't counter bless you so you stay really free. Israel did that sometimes. When Israel did, there were not poor people in Israel. When Israel didn't, there were. Into the New Testament, the Old Testament law changes a lot. It's not like this is what we must do so that we are accepted by God. But the basic pattern there, when Jesus talks about the widow giving her 2 cents or 2 pennies, or any of the things that the New Testament says about money, they all come down to that same basic rhythm. If God blesses us with what we think we need, tip out a little bit first. First fruits, tithing is the word we use. Tip out a little bit of it first, and then let God dump back everything we need to stay really free. One of the most pointed passages is actually 2 chapters before the New Testament. You can find it easy if you want to read it. I encourage you to read it. More homework. Read it tonight before you go to bed. Malachi chapter 3, 2 chapters before you get to the New Testament. Malachi 3, God starts in this thing speaking through the prophet. You're robbing me, he says to his people. And they're like, what? We're not. It's like kids when something's broken in the house. No, we didn't do it. You're robbing me. And they say, well, how do you rob me? How are we robbing you? And God says, by withholding your tithes. And Israel's unspoken things like, geesh, is this like a tax? And then God gives, I think this is interesting, the only command in Scripture that has a trial phase, an introductory period. God says, try this. Read it, Malachi 3. I'm not making this stuff up. Try it. Bring in the whole tithe and see if I don't pour out my blessings, if I don't open the flood houses, the floodgates of heaven, or storehouses of heaven, depending what translation. Let me pour it out and see if I don't just outgive you as you tithe to me. Now what's cool is it's a percentage thing. It's not like, well, so-and-so is really wealthy, they can do it. Well, the other percentage is going to be a lot more whatever the currency is in their day. If you're really, really poor, your amount is very, very small. It's not equal contribution, it's equal sacrifice. But it's like that whole tipping out a little bit first, because God's the one that takes care of us, and then let God tip back. My sense, God is bringing new life as we mature from a church in our childhood years to a church in our adolescent years. He's maturing us to the point where we have with our kids where it's time to talk about tithing. It's time to talk about how we trust God with our treasurer, because where our treasure is, there our hearts are also. And so God comes and says, try me. And so we're here to listen.
Hi, my name is Christine Bierma, and I have been a member here for 13 years. So it's been a long time. Most of my kids are taller than me now, but when we got here, they were just babies. And we had the opportunity I say that now 13 years later, but we got to set up chairs, and we got to set up sound systems, and take care of babies in rooms that were really more meant for classrooms. And that was an exciting time. And then I also got the opportunity to be a staff member here, and that was also a fantastic time. And just recently, I mean really, really recently, they have let me sit on council, which is quite scary sometimes. It's a big room of people that know a lot, and I thought, how am I supposed to be sitting here with all of these people? And so recently that I've really only attended 2 council meetings. 2, count them, 1, 2. The first one was great because it was very nice. It was a meet and greet with Ron, and they served us dinner, and we got to tell our stories, and I thought, if this is what council is like, this is fantastic. I will come every month. And then the second one, we all sat down, and they said, okay, well, now we get to approve the budget for 2012, 2013, and I was like, boom, 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 that's what happened. And I sat and listened to the information that Ross is gonna tell you about, and that we talked about in the letter, and about deficits and giving and donations, and what we don't have and what we do have. And a lot of times when I sit and listen to boards talk about money, they bring out Excel sheets, and I look at all the tiny numbers and I think, well, I'm just going to check out for the next 20 minutes because this doesn't make any sense to me. But that Monday night I sat and listened, and they talked about really big numbers. And at first I was terribly afraid. And thought, you know how when you sit in a meeting and you have a conversation with yourself in your head, and you're listening to what's going on, but you're really kind of talking to yourself. And I thought, there is no way that I'm going to vote for this. This is, I'd rather have lunch or dinner or whatever. But I sat and listened to members of council who had been there for many years. These were men and women who knew a lot more than I did. They knew a lot more about the work that it takes as a council member. They were intimately aware of the numbers, of the finances, and yet they passionately passionately talked about God's plan for New Life Church. And it almost seemed to me like the men who knew the most were the ones who were the most excited about this fantastic deficit that we had. And they said, we can do this. And so I want to encourage you, because I feel sort of like you're sort of where I was a couple weeks ago at my second council meeting before we were approving this budget. And I want to encourage you that before you allow fear to dictate how you're thinking about this, put that aside and let God just grow faith inside of you and listen to the passion that these men and women come and talk to you about what's happening. I think about it wasn't that many years ago that I stood on this ground and there wasn't anything but cornfields and soybeans. And we stood around in a large circle that they had marked out that meant that this was going to be where New Life Church was. And we stood there and we held hands and we prayed. And we prayed to God because we knew that He had ordained this church to be in this community at this time, and that He had great work to do in this neighborhood, that He was going to build relationships like we had never known, that He was going to bless families that we didn't even know existed, families that weren't even in this neighborhood yet. They hadn't even moved in, and He already had plans to bless them. I believe with all of my heart that even though I don't have a graph to show you that will tell you exactly how we're going to get where we want to get, I believe with all my heart that God is laying this path out for us and that He's saying to us, your time of waiting is over. This time of transition that you have been working in and living in and worshiping in is over. And it is time to take His hand and to walk forward. And that is what I see as I look into New Life Church's future.
Hi, I'm Gary Mazian. Just a few thoughts. Ron had given us a little bit of background about the young church, then becoming the teenage or adolescent church, and I thought it might be useful maybe to kind of take that and just give you a little more concrete information on that. A few things. As we're into those teenage years, we always want to be treated, as Ron indicated, with more independence. But at the same time that we're taking on that independence and that growth, we're also needing to step up on responsibilities as well. And our council meeting a couple weeks ago took into consideration those steps into young adulthood, being in that teenage period, and what's involved in that, and stepping up responsibility, and one of those, of course, being paying our own bills. Our church has been blessed in a number of ways over the years with not having to absorb all the cost involved in being a younger church. We have had the benefit of Orland Park Church assisting us in the beginning and over the years, and their assistance has been just critical, been so much appreciated, such a blessing, but the time for that has really come to an end. We also, at the same time, haven't paid a senior pastor for 5 years. We've had large contributions, as you know, from Home Missions to pick up some of that expense, picking up a number of obligations that we had here because our pastor wasn't full-time. And so, again, that funding has, at this point, stopped as well. We haven't had a director of arts for 2 years, and we've been working off the wonderful contributions of people who volunteered and given a tremendous amount of time. And at this point, we're looking into the possibility of a director of arts and have been pushing forward in that direction as well. We have now gained ourselves a pastor, a full-time pastor, to lead us, to bring us into the next phase of New Life Church. The excitement we can sense. At the same time, there are obligations that come with that as well. And I think at the same time, we've been in I think we have to all acknowledge a kind of a laid-back period, maybe a touch of a stagnation period while we've waited for God to give us His clear thoughts as far as our leading pastor. Our attendance had slipped down a little bit, our contributions had slipped down a little bit. I think it's kind of just a normal situation where as people we just say, I want to see what happens. I want to see what happens with New Life. The economy's been difficult. Just a number of things have come together to create, I think, just a sit back and watch situation with New Life. And as a member of council, listening to others' thoughts, listening to the excitement of staff, many of us feel it's really a wonderful, incredible opportunity to take New Life to the next step. This church has always been an exciting church to come to. You can sense it when you come in on a Sunday morning. You just hear the noise, you hear the activity, you see the young families, and it's something that has been just a wonderful part to be a part of. And we can see this as really jumping up to the next level. And with not that I got to say, and it doesn't look to us to be an unsurmountable task. It doesn't look like something that's overwhelming. New Life has faced a number of challenges in the past. We were going to simply build a church, not a gymnasium. We ended up taking that leap of faith, ending up adding on to the church as well. There have been a number of opportunities in the past, and New Life has always been there. God's always been there to bless New Life. And at this point, just a few thoughts kind of have gone through my mind, and just maybe a couple of reminders of things I think we all really already know. I guess the first one is fearful versus cheerful. We over the years we take out of those teenage years a certain look into the future. We're all willing to get our first job. We graduate, whether it's high school or college. We get that first job, we get ourselves a place to live, we get ourselves a car. Are we a little scared? Absolutely we are. But we do it anyway. We also then look down the road further, we get married. Are we a little worried about doing that? Absolutely we are. Are we going to be able to take care of those expenses? We always think ultimately it will work out. We then look to starting a family. We know that there's going to be a tremendous amount of expense there. Are we willing to do that? We are. We're willing to take that on. And then we look to our families as they get older and we see college expense or other expenses. And are we willing to take those on? We are willing to do those. We look to, down the road further, retirement, and we say to ourselves, will we have enough when we retire? And none of us know whether we will or not. However, somehow we do get to that point in our lives, many of us, and ultimately that does work out. So it's a matter of are we fearful or are we cheerful? It's a matter, I think, of trust. We've trusted throughout our lives, and we kind of looked here to, can we trust as well? Again, a matter of using our heart maybe more than our cautious mind. I think that's really what it might come down to. A couple other thoughts of, is it mine or is it His? We look at how God has blessed us over the years, and we think of the possibilities of our health. We see our health. We've been blessed by the Lord with that. We have been blessed with the capacity to learn, blessed by the opportunities He's given us. And so at that point, we have to say, our money, is it really mine or is it really His? And what do we do with that as well? It's interesting that so many of the parables that we hear about have to do with money and how we should handle that and what we're taught by the Lord in how we should handle our finances. Planting the seed comes to mind as well. The idea that if we plant no crop at all, we're going to get nothing. If we plant a modest crop, we're going to get something, but we'll get a modest yield. But if we plant and we plant to a great extent, what we could reap as rewards for our community, it could be just overwhelming, and we all feel the excitement of wanting to plant at this point. The word dedication always has stuck out to me in the New Life. New Life is dedicated to connecting people to God. Dedicated, I've always thought, means striving, striving for excellence. And I thought when I looked at that, it's the word that always jumps out at me, that it's something that we have always tried to do here. When Pastor Ron puts together a message, we know he's giving his message to the best of his ability. When we have children's ministry going on, I know that Lisa Schneiders and her staff are really doing it to the best of their ability. And I feel the same. You see Jen with Food Pantry, and that's coming off to the best of her ability. And so it's something that New Life has always, I think, put number one, is trying to do things to the best of our ability. We fail sometimes. Sometimes we'll fall short. Sometimes things won't be perfect. But I do feel that that word has always meant a lot here. I think the last thing that just goes through my mind is just reflecting on the chair you're sitting in even for a minute. When we sit in that chair, you're not sitting on the corner of that chair, and you're not sitting on just half of that chair. You're all in. You're trusting that chair to support you. And I think it's an interesting analogy, and I know Ron's a player of analogies as well, but I've always thought that with our church and with the Lord, we should be all in. And if we have the confidence in that chair to support us, we certainly have the confidence in the Lord. Thank you.
Well, before we go to the graphs, a couple of points of interest to you. There's going to be some numbers that pop up on the screen in a little bit. It's going to be a story that many have never seen before. In fact, even anybody that sits out there besides council, finance committee may have never seen the picture that we're going to show you. And that's what the idea here is today, is to give you a picture. We're not going to get into all the grave details and bore everybody with spreadsheets, as that would put a lot of people to sleep, and I've been told not to do that a few times, so I've been through that. But we realize that these numbers are God's numbers, they're not ours. We're managers of what He provides to us, and that's why we're here today. We're trying to help manage through and kind of think about where He's bringing us and where we're going. And as I will end in something I read this week in one of my devotions about prayer. But as we go through all this, we're just reminded that these are God's numbers. And so the finance committee gets together usually in July, and our fiscal year runs from September 1st through August 31st. And in July, we start looking at how has the church been going for the first 10 months of the year, and then kind of anticipating and start to put together a budget for 2013, which starts September 1st. And we spent a good 6-7 weeks even tweaking up to the last council meeting numbers that we've been receiving and information we've been getting, and trying to really just present the best picture we have to the council that finance committee could put together, as well as what we're going to show tonight up on the screen. So there's been a lot of prayer, a lot of thought, a lot of discussions about where we're going in the future, and kind of how do we spend the resources God is giving us on staff and technology and the building, and there's the community, really how do we reach out to the community and use the resources, because that really tells a big picture of what a church is where they're spending on the community. So all these things we continue to work on. But when we prepare the budget, we got a lot of history on the expense side of it. We've been doing this for a long time now, 16 years, so we have a pretty good history of where the expense side is going. But the donation side is always a little difficult to determine where that may be going. So when we pull up the first chart here on donations, you can kind of see where the last 5 years have been. And overall, the story is from 08 to 09, the blue number, the blue column goes from 891 to 780 from 08 to 09. That really saw the effects of a really bad economy, a lot of layoffs, a lot of hurts that happened then. And from there, you look at the general funds, they kind of leveled off through the last few years. And then in 2010, recall that kind of when we knew our senior pastor was going to be gone. He announced that to the congregation, and some of the thoughts there of, we're some stagnation, we'll just wait till the next senior pastor shows up. That's our gut feeling from 2010 through 2012, what's really happened there, our general fund numbers. Up top in the red is the CRC, Home Missions, Calvin support that Gary was speaking to. And from 2011, last year through this is our first full year without any of that support. We could see we were able to have 91,000 of support in 2011, and that fell off to 0 last year. It's a big number to overcome, but I want to show you where that support that Gary was talking about over the last few years has come from. And so that's where we've been kind of wrestling with over the last year. And now that we have a senior pastor in place and there's dreams of, what's next, where are we going from here with a director of arts person, and, how do we continue to affect the community better and be more influential? We're taking that, we're struggling with, how do we overcome some of the deficits that we have? Not easy to deal with. But 2013, when we prepare our budget, and you're going to see it in a couple slides, we just take last year's donation number and we put it to this year. We have no idea where donations are going to go in reality. We could project up 5%, 10% just to fill a hole and make it all look nice. But our view was we're just going to take the last year's number, put it to this year, and then we can show a real picture of what we're going to struggle with or the benefits and the resources that we have to work with. So that's where you see the 2012 to 2013. Ideally, with the add-in of the new staff people, that's the number we are looking to for the coming year to overcome. It looks like a big number, but we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. If we go to the expense line item, this shows kind of our outflows over the last few years. Again, a lot of numbers on that slide. Still not a spreadsheet, but I'm trying to reduce it down a little bit, what was requested of me. But the big items here are the three big areas. We took office and occupancy, which is the blue, payroll and employees, which is red, and I'll work through that in a minute with you. And then benevolence, mission support, which has been fairly constant, but you're seeing our needs for benevolence over the last few years has continued to grow. And we will fulfill those benevolent needs. That's something our heart is for. Those people that come to our church are not going to be let down. We're going to be there for them. And you can see where that's been increasing over the last few years. In regards to office and occupancy, this is where you're seeing the staff do. We continually say it, but we see the staff do an outstanding job, where they've reduced our office and occupancy over the last 5 years by 22%. That's almost a quarter of a reduction in expenses. And that's really how we've been working through some of the continued declines in donations we've been seeing. But we're kind of getting to that point where there's very little to wring out anymore on that side of the equation. The payroll from 2008 through 2010, we added 2 staff members. We added an associate pastor, and we added, during that time, a director of arts position. And then from 2012 to 13, again, it looks like a big jump. We're not giving out 20% increases in staff pay to anybody. It's really bringing on our senior pastor and bringing on a director of arts position, which is a desire. That shows as if the director of arts person was here for a full year. We know that's not the case. We're still trying to work through some of that. But if a director of arts person was here as of September 1st, that's the type of hole, or that's the type of expense that we'd be looking to. But typically, we've had increases for staff in general from 0%, which some experienced last year, 0 to 3% a year. So beyond that, any material changes in the payroll and employee benefits is healthcare, which continues to go up 15, 16% a year, which is a huge number for us. And adding additional staff that we believe God's leading us to. So we have one more graph, and this is where Christine probably initially indicated, like, wow, that's a big number. That's a big number to overcome. It's donations, less our expenses, and that's a negative number. That's a shortfall. That's not us having extra dollars in the kitty to pay for expenses for the coming year. And it seems like a big number, but when you look at it, you start breaking it down, it's doable. And the reason why we say that is we go back to two items. One is, if you go back to 2010, before Pastor Jewell announced that he left, that would bring up bring our deficit of the $65,000. If we can get our donations back to, now we have full-time senior staff person in play. The people who were kind of on the fence about where that was all going, you start to see that support come back. So that would bring us, if we go back 2 years, that would bring us halfway, almost halfway there to covering the shortfall. The second number is what I would call the $27,000 historical budget shortfall. Every year we have some shortfall we deal with. It ranges from 15 to 25, 28,000. We can work around that, as we go throughout the year. That's something we've dealt with before. It's not new to us, so we believe that that's something we can work around as we move forward. And then the last piece is the Director of Arts piece. While we don't have a Director of Arts person today, there's a vision here that we need that person. That we hear it from people that for us to continue the ministry and to move forward, with what the desire and the vision of New Life Church is, that's a piece of the puzzle, and we would desire to have that sooner than later. It doesn't make a whole lot of. We're viewing it as we don't want to continue to push that down the road and wait for all the moons to align, because they never will, to hire that next person. This is a leap of faith, and that's where. I had a devotion this week, Rick Warren, Daily Hope, kind of the purpose-driven life devotions. I'm not sure if any of you received that via email. And he says, choose faith and it will increase. And it referenced Matthew 6, verse 30. And it says, God clothes the grass in the field, which is alive today, but tomorrow is thrown into the fire. So you can even be more sure that God will clothe you. Don't have so little faith. And then the last paragraph of that devotion said, how do you increase your faith when there are so many circumstances in life that cause you to worry? Start praying in advance. Most of the time you can see what's coming. That's why we do a budget. You can see what's coming, so you can either choose to worry about it or start putting your faith in God before it gets to you. Jesus tells this story in Luke 8. The seed that fell among the thorny weeds is like those who hear God's teaching, but they left the worries, riches, and pleasures of this life keep them from growing and producing good fruit. If you pray about the things that are worrying you, your faith will produce a burst of growth and joy, productivity, and significance like you've never seen before. And that's something I believe. I've been part of council for about 3.5 years, and we bring everything to prayer, and that's where we have comfort that this is something that's achievable. But we also wanted to bring it to the New Life community and let them see what we continue to struggle with every day, and just bring the awareness up and try to improve upon our communication. So that's kind of why we're all here today. And as we move forward, we're going to try to continue to improve upon our communication. This is step one. And we're going to continue to push and try to do a better job, and we look for your input and how we can do a better job with that.
All right, well, what's awesome is getting up after you see a $140,000 slide and being the next speaker. So thank you for that, Ross. Awesome. My name is Jeff Dreifeld. My wife, Becky, and I have been coming to New Life Church for about 12 years or so, and with our 3 kids, and been serving on council. This is my last year, so year 5. And I've been across a lot of those bars that you've seen there, and it's been a real blessing, really, to be at New Life Church. So I'm the last speaker, and then we're going to actually open up for a little Q&A. So you heard a lot of information today, right? What does it really kind of all mean? How do we really boil it down? So a couple of thoughts from a perspective is, one, this is a good thing that we're here. I mean, to see growth and to see what's next is really exciting. I mean, a lot of the things that I've heard, through you and through others that are sitting on council and staff, is we've been in this time of transition for so long, right? And we've been in this kind of what's next phase. And we're here. This is the what's next phase. And I think that's really exciting. Do we have all the answers? Absolutely not. But this is kind of that next chapter for New Life Church. We talked a lot about stories, and so I think it's good to just kind of pause and say this is a healthy thing that we're here and talking about this, because we want to address it in the way that we feel that God's leading us, and your voice in that is absolutely key. Another part of that is a recognition of the role that everyone here has already played at New Life Church. You guys have given your time and your gift and your talents and spent a lot of time here, whether it be packing up and breaking down an entire church when we didn't even have a building to, even this weekend, doing everything that needs to be done for a church to run. You guys have been there and you've been faithful, and you see that in the charts there. And so for that, just thank you for that, for all that you're doing. And I think that's important to recognize that work. The numbers that you saw up there with Ross is sitting on the finance team, and that is a team that you probably don't see and get a lot of visibility to, but it's a group that actually has a tremendous amount of expertise and experience within this arena. I mean, they own their own businesses as CPAs, financial analysts, things like this, and so for them to go through this and to present this to council and say, here's where we're at, but we think we can do this, that's a big step. Think about it. How do you get an accountant to say, yeah, we can do that? It's hard. There's a lot of sweat that I know Ross wipes off his brow, but just thank them for the work that they do, and they do spend a lot of time kind of wrestling with not only the day-to-day, but what it means for the next 5 years. The New Life staff, just to give a credit and a shout out for them, I mean, you see those expenses going down year over year over year. That's not easy. That is really not easy. Inflation's not going down, right? And so the way that they've been able to do so much more with less has been tremendous, and so I think that's part of it. Overall, I think that the message there is there hasn't been a lot of splurging, right? We take this job of being good stewards of the dollars that God gives us very seriously. And, the number that you see out there, let's really break it down. You heard a lot, we can do it, all right? Well, it's hard to get your head around that. And when you really think about it, what that means overall is that to overcome that gap that we see over there versus our budget requires about an 18% increase in giving for each family. Okay? All right, pause, big number, right? So as we kind of started talking about that a little bit more and saying, okay, what is that really, why do we believe this is achievable, and what makes us think that and gives us that confidence? And as we really broke it down, we said, is it challenging? Yeah, but achievable? Absolutely. And we broke it down into kind of a weekly basis, and I think the actual numbers, thank you, finance team, is $13.71, a week per family of increased giving, right? And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. And someone kind of brought up this analogy of the pizza, right? It's like, well, that's a pizza. And from being from Chicago, that's not even a good pizza. I mean, that's like a Northern California kind of pizza. And I don't know if anyone here, yeah. I lived in California for a while. They don't get pizza. They don't get it, right? I don't know if the Vanderbilts have experienced good pizza yet, but certainly this analogy of pizza. I'm sorry, I'll get back to the script. But anyways, it's really not about pizza. I don't mean to kind of just make light of that, but for us, it kind of said, yeah, okay, that can make sense. There are other things that we can do. Even personally, we even started talking about different ways. Well, I can, not go for lunch once a week, and make my own brown bag and stuff like that. And there was kind of an interesting little rhythm there talking with other people about the ways that can be done. And so I think the idea behind it is not the actual dollar value, but it's just to get your head around the doable nature that we believe that the New Life congregation can embrace this idea, okay? So as such, you've heard a lot of words here. You've heard a lot of talking. And so as leaders at New Life Church Council and New Life Church staff, we wanted to back those words up with action. And so what we all committed is that there's a unification and there is a standing together behind this effort. I think it would be really unfair for us as leaders of this church to ask this without really believing it and making action for ourselves. And so we are committed as the New Life leadership to commit to achieving this budget. And we've taken actions within our own finances to make that happen. And so that's a really more of a testament to show ourselves, and also really what we believe God to be calling us to do is that this is doable. One of the other things that Ron kind of touched on a little bit is I think we've kind of stunk, to be frank, at letting everyone know kind of where we stand. Even during the good times. So one of the commitments that we have is that with this new chapter of New Life Church, we want that story to be very transparent, right? We not only during the rough times when we come and talk to the congregation, but during the times where God's really richly blessed us. And so our commitment to the congregation of New Life Church is that on a quarterly basis, we will give you the information, around how we're doing, what that looks like. This is an important meeting today. What does that look like in 3 months? So every 90 days, just getting a sense of the pulse of kind of how we're doing and seeing how God is blessing us. So with that, what does it all mean and what do we do from here? And what we're asking is, we're asking you to join us. Join us in this commitment to New Life Church. And really there's 3 things that I would say, what that commitment looks like. And the first thing is just cover it in prayer. We've been looking at these numbers for a long time, and it always starts with calming our hearts and understanding, making time for God to speak to us, right? So just pray for this before your head hits the pillow tonight. That's what we want. Is to pray for it. Secondly, is listen. Listen to where's God tugging you. And that's going to be different for every person and every family. Every situation's different. Everyone's at a different spot, and we completely recognize that. However, where do you feel God tugging? And then the last piece of that is really act. Something specific. It could be a conversation with your spouse around, hey, what do you think about what they talked about today? It could be, yes, I feel being led here, and here's an action that I'm going to take there. So we want to make sure that, coming out of this, that you've prayed about it, you've listened about it, and then act in some way, that's relevant to you on how to move forward. So, with that, I'm done talking, and I think we're done talking at this point in time. And actually, we're going to open it up for Q&A.